In order to attach the sides to the bases of the boxes, I'm going to use a technique that uses a thing called a domino. A domino is a little kind of a floating tenon. It's just a small piece of wood here that fits into a slot that you cut into your material, and it gets glued in place. If I cut a slot into the base and cut a corresponding slot into the bottom of a side, and do that for, in this case, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dominoes, I can then assemble like this, glue it all together, and it'll be very, very strong. Of course, I do that on the other side, the top as well, and the back, and we'd have a very strong assembly. To cut these domino mortises, you use a thing called the domino machine, and it works a little bit like a biscuit jointer. He's got a blade here. Instead of being a blade like you have in a biscuit jointer, this is more like, it looks almost like a drill, like a twist drill, and it spins, and as it spins it wobbles side to side, and it cuts out the oblong mortise. And all you got to do is make sure you're lined up well on your marks, which I've already made. I made marks on the base, I made corresponding marks on the sides so that the tenons would line up perfectly. This is a Festool machine, and so it's hooked up to the Festool dust extractor, which is like a vacuum cleaner, and so you don't get any dust in this process. Now, to do the lineup, you want to make sure that you are right on the line and on your mark, and there is a very accurate scribings on the base of this tool so that you can make sure you're lined up. You also want to make sure that you're very flush against the surface of the work so that you're making a nice straight hole. You go ahead and you turn the machine on. There you go, that's all there is to it. I've made all the slots in the bottom and top. You can see here how that's done. And now I'll make the slots in the sides that will mate up. Now I want those sides to actually be set in about 1 millimeter, you know, a 32nd of an inch or so from the edge of the bottom, so that you don't have a perfect alignment of the bottom edge and the side. It makes for a little better visual appearance. So in order to do that, I simply offset the depth of the fence on here by about 1 millimeter for doing these side mortises, and they should line up the way I want them to. Okay, so I've made my mortises, and I took a few of the dominoes and sanded them down something so they wouldn't fit really tight, so I'd be able to remove them. Normally these dominoes fit very tightly, and these 4 will be my fit-up dominoes, where I can take my side and go ahead and install it just using the front and the back domino, just to make sure that I've got a good fit here in the back, and also it enables me to make a mark on the edge of the side, the front, so I can cut that to the proper angle, and so it'll be nice and flush with the bottom and the top. At that point I can then go ahead and edge band the bottom, top, sides, and everything ought to match up very nicely. What you see here is the back of the center box, and there's 2 dust dividers that separate the drawers and help hold up the drawers, and I'm going to put a domino right in the center of where that dust divider butts up against the back to help hold the center nice and level so it doesn't sag down any. And I'm just demonstrating how versatile the Domino machine is. All I have to do is line up a straight edge here, make my marks, check my lineup, go ahead and turn on the machine. There we go. Right in the center of the panel we have a mortise for a domino. Now things are getting exciting. I'm going to be sanding the faces of the panels. Now it's not that sanding is all that exciting, but it means that the next step is putting on some finish, and that's where I'm going to really get to see how the figure pops. I'm using a Festool Rotex sander. It's in the random orbit mode with the P320 sandpaper. Trying carefully not to damage any veneer, but to get her nice and smooth and perfect. I'm also wearing some anti-vibration gloves, which I like because it makes my hands feel better. Now I'll follow up this machine sanding with hand sanding using P400 sandpaper, and then I'll be ready for some finish. Okay, I've actually sanded the panels down to P600. I went ahead and went one more grit finer to get a nice smooth finish, and now I'm going to put the first coat of shellac polish. Now shellac polish is simply blonde, in my case blonde shellac, diluted at the ratio of a ½ pound of shellac flakes to a gallon of denatured alcohol, and let that dissolve, and we call that ½ pound cut. And it comes on very thin. You can see how thin this stuff is. And I pat it on with just a piece of cotton. Now on the backs that are going to have some glue joints, I'm going to be very careful to not get the shellac where there might be some glue, and on the backs where it's a large plain surface, I'll just do the whole thing. And so I just pat it on very carefully, slowly, very thin coat. And then just go ahead and fill out the field. Now I'm going to do probably 6 or 7 coats like this. The first 2 coats I'll just do in quick succession to get a little bit of a build-up. But then I'll be sanding, starting with 400 grit, then moving up to 600 grit sandpaper between coats. And I'll know when I'm done when the surface feels nice and glossy, and I can kind of judge by the amount of material that gets on the sandpaper as to how much more I should continue to build up layers. I've got the shellac polish on all the surfaces. I ended up putting 8 coats on. And now I'm going to start glue up by gluing the dust dividers for the drawer section, that's the center section of the piece, into the dados I had made. And I expect to get some glue squeeze out, so I'm going to apply some waxy lit product from Lee Valley. It's a waxy substance. You can apply it along where you expect glue squeeze out, and when the glue does squeeze out, let it dry and peel it off. It'll peel right off of the waxy lit. You don't have to use much. Just rub it on there. Wipe it on. I'm using Titebond Original for this glue up because it's light in color, and any glue line won't show up as dark. And it's a good glue, so I won't have any problems. I've already applied some to the inside of this dado. Now I'll just apply a little bit to this face. Now this is not going to be a great glue joint because it's plywood and not all the grain is going to be, well, some of the grain is going to be cross grain, but there's a lot of surface area, and I think it'll hold the dust panel in here firmly, particularly when the rest of the pieces glued together. Now be careful just to line up the back of the dust panel with the back of the side. Okay, I've got the glue on. I think I misspoke a minute ago when I said that the joint would not be as strong as it could be because of cross grain. What I meant was end grain. Every other layer of plywood has end grain, which does not make as strong a glue joint as when you're gluing with the grain. Now, it's all clamped up. The panels were slightly bowed away from the center, so I didn't need to use a strong back across here, and I'm getting good glue contact all along the length. Now, since this is the very first glue up, I want to make sure that everything is square, and as you can see, it's not. So I'm going to have to correct that now, and I'll correct that by adjusting the clamps such that they have a tendency to pull the assembly into square. I just simply offset them a little bit. I wanted to give you a close-up of how we get the glue squeeze out off with this waxy lit product. This is the piece that you saw me gluing up earlier. I'm just going to take a sharp little spatula here and just kind of in the corner just chip off the glue, and it comes off in big chunks and just leaves a nice clean surface. You don't have to get gouging into the wood or anything. You're just basically trying to lift up the edge of the glue carefully, and it's just not sticking to the wood. Next, I'll glue the bottom to the sides. The bottom is going to be held mostly using dominoes. So first thing I want to do is go ahead and put a little glue into the mortises onto the domino. Go ahead and tap the domino home. I'm putting the domino into the bottom first, and that is because I want to get full penetration into the bottom, because this is pretty much half end grain in these mortises, if you think about the way plywood is constructed. So I want to get as much glue exposure as I can. Then I'll go ahead, once I've got the tenons into the dominoes into the mortises, I'll go ahead and spread a little glue on each one. I've already done waxy lit along the surfaces where I expect squeeze out, so I'm not going to worry too much about how much glue I get on here, as long as I get enough, and a little squeeze out's not going to hurt anything. And while I'm at it, I'll put a little bit of glue between the dominoes as well. I don't expect a lot of good glue surface on the ends of the plywood, but every little bit helps. And then I'll go ahead and put some glue in the mortises on the side. I've turned the side upside down so that I'm not accidentally going to glue the top to the bottom, if you know what I mean. Now I'm ready to go ahead and clamp this up. I've got a couple of spacer blocks here. It'll make it easy to get the clamps around the bottom. I've got front to front, bottom to bottom, so I should be in good shape. And here you see the bottom and the bottom carcass all glued together, lots of clamps. And we'll let that set and take the clamps off, and when the glue is thoroughly dry, we'll peel off the excess, squeeze out, and we'll be ready to glue the top on.